Welcome to Southern Life. On today's video, we're going to be looking at the top 10 oldest inmates to ever step foot in the Okaloosa County Jail. Located in the Florida Panhandle with towns like Destin, Okaloosa County is one of the most beautiful places in Florida where people of elderly and ancient ages retire along the beaches of Florida. However, on today's video, we're going to pose an interesting ethical and moral question of how old is too old to get arrested. And while today's video is definitely going to be hilarious because of the age and charges of these individuals, it does raise an interesting question: the morality of arresting somebody in advanced age. And well, some of these people are almost ancient at that. So with no further ado, let's get started with today's video of the top 10 oldest inmates to step foot in the Okaloosa County Jail. Number 1 is Irene Taylor, age 94 years old. In fact, she's so old that her listed address is actually at the hospital, and her charge is driving with a license that has been suspended or revoked since 1893. Interesting question: should somebody that's 94 years old be driving? Well, she's living in a hospital at that age in Florida. Should she be driving? For the sake of everybody else in society, probably not. Does it merit getting arrested? That's a very interesting and ethical question. To arrest somebody at 94 years old is definitely an interesting scenario, and I can't imagine the officer that made this decision, how difficult of a day he must have had at work. I would assume that most of the time when law enforcement officers deal with people like this and this age group, they're very merciful and kind, but at some point, her license was taken away, probably because she couldn't drive worth a crap for decades, and here she is again driving without a driver's license.
Hey, look here, mister. I was driving before you were born.
No, look, lady, you were probably driving before the arresting officer's grandparents were born, and that doesn't make it any safer. Number 2, Miss Ruth Newton Johnson, 89 and on the grind. She was actually arrested for uttering a worthless check. At 89 years old, she's one of the oldest inmates that has ever stepped foot in this jail. She was booked and then released maybe 20 minutes later. At 89 years old, she doesn't have a lot of life left in her, so it doesn't make sense to hold her forever. So you were wondering, how common is it for people in her age group to make fake checks? It is surprisingly common, and let me tell you why. Individuals have had money for most of their lives, but they don't plan on living to nearly 90 years old. They may have had a nice nest egg to get them to 87, 89. Nobody plans to live that long, so even if their finances were very good, when they live 20 years more than expected, the money runs out. When the money runs out, they're just used to writing a check all the time. They don't really handle money itself. At this point, they just write checks, and they're used to the notion of just writing a check to somebody. So if somebody's working for them or moving stuff or cleaning the house, they'll write a check when there's no more balances because, well, this is the only way they know how to get things done. And at some point, they may be aware that there's no more money left, but they don't know what else to do. They're too old to do anything else. All they have is a checkbook, so they'll start to use their checkbook knowing there's no more money left. Now, when I lived in Naples, Florida, I actually had this happen to me. I had a woman in her mid-80s who used me for work, and she gave me a check that had no balance. The stuff that I was moving for her was very valuable stuff into a storage unit, and she used me, and she was unbearable, and she was demanding, and she was a total Karen, and then the check bounced. So I actually had to go to the bank with law enforcement, and while I didn't press charges on her, I did demand that my money be given to me. Eventually, I think a family member gave me a check for the difference, and we were even. So it's a deal where these individuals are also used to taking advantage of other people, and they've got away with everything their whole lives because their whole lives they've been wealthy. So when they get to this age and they run out of money, they still think that people have to give them the world in their hands, and it isn't exactly the case. So in my case, I was poor, hungry, and the stuff that I was moving for her was actually really expensive stuff. So it's one of those deals where she was trying to hold on to all this furniture that was worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and the responsibility of moving that stuff couldn't just fall on a random stranger. So what a lot of these people do is they start to look for random strangers where they can give them false checks, and eventually after doing it several times, law enforcement gets sick and tired of it. So despite their elderly age, they will get arrested for this. And there's only so much that society can tolerate from somebody who's just using other people. And many times the services that they're using aren't even things that they actually need. It's more like things they want, and they just want the ability to control other people and make other people do things for them. And they'll grab a random stranger off the street who's got a service, make them work, and when the check clears, it doesn't. And then that person just spent 2 days catering to this person's every need and desire with a check that doesn't exist. And that's a problem because, of course, you can't just go around using other people despite your elderly age. And these are individuals that do this all the freaking time. It's very frustrating when these individuals, again, we're not talking about necessities, we're not talking about nursing homes, we're talking about things like making people clean their house, making people trim the trees, things that perhaps didn't even need to get done. It wasn't a necessity and they couldn't afford it, but they still try to get people to do things with checks that had no money behind them. And before we move on to number 3, I don't want to see any sad faces from anybody. We're not really doing this in chronological order by age. I'm just giving you guys a list of a bunch of old people that have been arrested. And they're all females, by the way. Let's not forget that. Meet Catherine Florence. At 85 years old, she was arrested for a domestic dispute by strangulation. That's right, she got her hands dirty and took care of things with her own 2 hands. Don't ever let your old age prevent you from doing the things you want to do with your life. Imagine that, 85 years old, and she is still doing things by manual labor. Admirable. And she earned the number 3 spot on today's list. Look at that, she's a top 3 contender. Number 4, meet Susan Porter. At 85, you won't take me alive. Now, she racked up 2 charges. One of them for battery on a police officer or a firefighter, and the other crime was a public order crime of using 911 unnecessarily with alarming information. So she probably called the cops on herself and then put her hands on the police officer. It's one of those deals where she got all Karen'd out and say, hey, I need something done and I need the law to do it. And the law's like, we're not doing that. And she said, you know what? If you don't do it, you're getting hurt. So for the number 4 spot, I'm 85 and you won't take me alive. But you won't believe the woman that's coming in at number 5. I didn't mean for that all to rhyme. It just worked out that way. Number 5, meet Zula. She's 85 years old and she looks satisfied. She actually was arrested for battery or striking somebody at 85 years old, a resident of Crestview. You can see in her face satisfaction. You ever wanted to do something so bad your whole life and then, you know what, like you're finally able to do that? That's what her mugshot screams. It's like her whole entire life she wanted to do something and she just woke up one day and said, you know what, today's the day. At the number 6 spot, we got Karen. She's 85 years old and she decided that she was going to take a few drinks and get behind the wheel. And notice it says DUI. It doesn't really specify whether it's the A or the D. She was on something. We don't know if it was liquid or powder or what the crap she was on. But law enforcement noticed while they were driving through Okaloosa County, somebody driving absolutely absurd. When they pull up, here's this 85-year-old woman by the name of Karen, who goes ahead and says, you know what, player? I drinks. I lives my life. I'm 85 years old. You ain't gonna tell me what to do at this age, young man. You can lock me up if you want to. And unfortunately, they did have to lock her up. Despite her age, she's out there living her best life somewhere in the Florida Panhandle. And I gotta say, by looking at this woman's mugshot, she doesn't seem remorseful or repentful or repent for none of that crap. She looks like she knew exactly what she was doing and she's satisfied that at her age, she does whatever she wants. Number 7, meet Ann Cohick. At 81 years old, she was arrested for making a false report. Yeah, she was down 911 and made a false report. She said she still had a pulse. False pulse leading to a false report. At 81 years old, she's bothering law enforcement. Perhaps she was making a false accusation that somebody wasn't taking care of her or somebody wasn't doing what they were supposed to. But regardless, at this age, a lot of elderly people feel the need to call law enforcement. And this is the second person on today's video that has that charge. It seems like one thing older people like to do is call the cops. It seems like at this age, the only anger they have left after all their family members abandoned them is just taking out a little bit of rage on law enforcement. And well, the cops have no problem locking her up for a false report on somebody with a false pulse. At 81 years old, She looks bitter and angry at the world, and she wants to take one last job at the law before it's too late. Number 8, meet Judith Peterson. She looks satisfied, don't she? Yeah, she knows what she did. At 83 years old, she was arrested for battery on a police officer or an EMT. I hope it's an EMT, but she could have gone after the law as well. You saw her photo. She seems satisfied. She said, I'm 83 and you ain't taking me without a fight. At the number 9 spot, we got Margaret. Now, Margaret is 80 and wavy, and she ain't playing around. See, Margaret, at 80 years old, was arrested for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon without the intent to send you to the grave. And she had another charge for battery. Now, everybody in Okaloosa County knows that Miss Margaret don't play around. And if you upset her, she gonna get knuck if you buck like them crime mob down there, I tell you what. Number 10 is Naomi getting arrested because you owe me. Another elderly woman writing checks with no balance. She has 2 counts of writing worthless checks. And her age of 82 is probably even higher than the balance on those checks she wrote. But see, Naomi is used to living a beautiful beachside lifestyle in Fort Walton Beach. And she didn't think she was going to live to 82 years old, and the money is drying up, but she still needs to have her carpets washed. She's been writing checks to people, and when they go to the bank, there's no balance left. Despite the fact her bank account has dried up, her lifespan hasn't, and she's out there writing false checks to continue living a lavish beachside lifestyle on the coastline of the Florida Panhandle. And while it might seem unethical to arrest somebody that old for writing a worthless check, keep in mind that these people that are working to take care of their families, it ain't their fault that somebody's out there trying to live on somebody else's bank. And it's also important to note that many times the things that they're trying to pay for with these checks are not essentials like food at the grocery store. A lot of times it's them trying to keep up a extremely demanding lifestyle. It's been my experience that when I've seen very old people write checks that have no balance, it isn't exactly for essential things they need, but more just a constant need of controlling other people and having somebody doing something on their property for them. In other words, they haven't come to grasp of the reality that there's no more money left, and that now that the money's dried up, they don't have the ability to get people to do whatever they want. So there's always a level of entitlement of an individual who for many years has been used to having everybody do everything for them because they had money. But when the money dries up, they still want to remain in charge, and the rest of society's not going to put up with it. You can only do that for so long. Eventually, you live too long and that money dries up, and now you're not able to have people at your service, young queen of 82 years old. And many times when they run out of money, they still got properties, they still have jewelry, they still have furniture. It's individuals who refuse to adapt to the notion of not getting everything they want when they want it. So don't think these people are always innocent when they're elderly and writing false checks. It seems like an innocent crime, but it really isn't. A lot of times it's individuals who just want everything from everybody else, have lived a life of self-indulgence, and that life is quickly coming to an end. And at their age, it's going to come to an end regardless. Now, there were a few contenders for today's video that didn't make the list, so let's briefly go over them. Now, Jeanette is 72 years old, and she was arrested for battery on somebody 65 and older. And my only thought is, that's a fair fight. I mean, I can see the disappointment in her face with these arrests, because it's like, okay, if you're 72 and the person's older than 65, that seems like a fair fight to me. At that point, hey, it's all for everybody there at that age. You can see in her face the disappointment. It seemed like a fair fight to me. I don't know why they arrested her. All right, guys, so those are the top 10 elderly female arrests in Okaloosa County. Thanks to their incredible website, which allows you to browse under different categories, I was able to find these arrests in a logical fashion. Today's video was thanks to the I struggle with this one, Okaloosa Sheriff's Department's website, which allows you to look by gender, age, even which exact agency made the arrest, which makes browsing for inmates a breeze. And thanks to this tool, we were able to make today's practical, useful video Crap, they even let you see the freaking address of the person that got arrested, which I do think is a little bit too much information. But it's done for the sake of public safety. Imagine if you had a neighbor next door and they were doing something illicit at the property. Now with the arrest records, you can know exactly what was going on that property. And if they continue to do it again, well, you're already aware of what you're looking for. So this is a public safety tool. Sadly, many counties in the Florida Panhandle, like Bay County, you have to know the person's exact name to get a result. And that means that there isn't a lot of transparency on who's getting arrested. Many people feel that the reason Bay County is trying to omit this information is because many of the people that are being arrested are actually bigwigs from Alabama. See, Bay County, Florida, a lot of people from Alabama who are powerful politicians and judges, many times while visiting Bay County, Florida, end up getting arrested. And those arrest reports make it to the news back home. There's been a few notable cases. And thus, Bay County, Florida cares more about protecting the identity of the people who get drunk on vacation and leave on probation than they do about transparency and public safety. Bay County, Florida in general has a horrendous reputation anyways, and it joins the list of other counties in Florida like St. Johns County who are currently going through the process of not making public arrest records, something that leads to public safety because we should all know the things that are happening in our community. So I applaud Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office for having one of the best inmate search engines on the internet. With the only thing I don't understand is why they don't chronologically list the dates from most recent. But other than that small detail, it is a great search engine and it leads to public safety. So in the state of Florida, we have counties like St. John's and Bay County that are trying to cover up, hide information, and other counties like Okaloosa who make it an incredible search tool for the public. And I believe that leads to the public knowing what's going on in their community, making their community safer. You have the option to actually care about public safety or the option to give people the illusion of public safety. And for some people whose main goal is to look after tourist dollars, the illusion of safety is actually more important than the actual safety itself. And it's a problem in Florida as many of these counties are starting to lock up their search engines for inmates, something that has always been a thing in Florida. And a lot of these sheriff's offices are blocking access to these websites. In the Florida Panhandle is also Escambria County. They also list their arrest records. They recently had a day where they had 13 arrests, 4 of which were listed as homeless. And many of these counties in Florida are starting to crack down on the homeless, and they're trying to conceal the wave of homeless people entering their correctional facilities. Keep in mind, too, that there are companies like Geo Global, which is a publicly traded company, and these companies make money on arrest, and they also make money on, yes, detention centers for ICE. So while some counties in Florida have great access to information for public safety, other agencies in Florida would rather hide what they're doing. It's interesting to live in a county where if somebody gets arrested, you can't even get the records for it. It definitely doesn't seem like the word transparency has a lot of priority to agencies that are doing this practice in the state of Florida. But these agencies are not being scrutinized for profiling the homeless or racial minorities or for targeting people for specific types of crimes because there's financial interest in these crimes. Incentive to arrest people for certain types of crimes because there's financial institutions that benefit from specific things in specific places because the people in charge of arresting people are also manipulating the economical advantages. There's a very deep and shady history in the state of Florida of people getting arrested and people finding clever and creative ways to benefit economically from that. And perhaps one of the reasons why these sheriff's offices in Florida are trying to conceal what's going on with these arrests is because there's a monetary incentive for them to continue doing what they're doing. They don't really care that the public knows the real motives and intentions for their behaviors. As long as the gravy train keeps moving and they're getting paid, it's all good for them.